Hey, John.
Hey, where are you?
Oh, I'm in Castle today here at Rackspace, but I'm having a little trouble getting my video camera turned on. After we just spent all this time together over the past couple of days, I know you missed my face.
Oh, every minute away from you hurts.
Yeah. Uh, let's see if I can figure out how to start this camera. We were at SP TechCon and yeah, you thought I'd forgotten about your giant floating head, didn't you?
Hoping.
Yeah, no. The SP TechCon, for speaker gifts this year, they gave us these awesome giant floating heads. And unfortunately, John, you weren't able to be there when they gave them out at the speaker dinner Tuesday night because you flew home. We were together all day Sunday teaching our awesome fun BI class. And so I collected your head for you. And my kids are excited now. They at least have gotten to meet Mr. John.
in like double life size, whatever.
I don't know.
Say something about giant heads and your head.
That's not that far off from your usual head size.
Thanks so much. I'll take it. That's fine. That's awesome.
Can't help it. I had to do a little something with them. They gave us these awesome things, so I figured that this was a good opportunity to utilize them. We're strategically placing them around the Rackspace Castle for funsies today.
Of course.
There will be more pictures to come.
So I've never actually been there, but now I've been there virtually. So
correct. Yes, sir.
That's excellent. Well, it has been a pretty busy week, hasn't it?
Yes, sir. I've spent more time with you in the past week than I have with my wife, so that's...
Yeah, I don't know what to say about that.
But, we've spent our week talking about BI, so it just made sense when we were scheduling this just to continue it on. So, episode number 2 now, although it's sort of 2B, because we did part of the Big IT Unity show, and we did a little bit of what we do here. So it's not quite episode 3, but it's more 2B. So.
Yeah, exactly. Or not 2B, depending on how you ask the question, I guess.
Yeah. We'll put it to Q&A and we'll see what it says. But
exactly. Oh, I should bring that window up, shouldn't I?
Yes, there you go. Well, so we have a decent number of folks on the line today. I'm wondering if it's because I tweeted our giant heads, but
I hope so. I hope I didn't scare too many people away, to tell you the truth.
I'm sure we're fine. So thanks everybody for being here for the Bifocal show. We're trying to do this every month. And as more and more of these updates are coming, John, we may end up having to do it a little bit more frequently than that. But I don't have the time. Do you?
I hear you. I hear you. We'll see how it goes. The content certainly wouldn't be a problem. Time could be. So we'll play it by ear.
Yeah. So for those of you in the interim, while you're looking for good BI content in between our fun show, you can always go out to John's blog, whitepages.unlimitedviz.com. I've stopped blogging out BI almost exclusively at this point because he gets to it first, so it just makes me angry. But I do kick some content out there still on BI, but John is just a master blogger. So make sure you're following whitepages.unlimitedviz.com and itunity.com because John's been publishing some decent content out there as well. But we've got some news to talk about today.
Yeah, there's a few things, and actually, you talk about blogging. I actually managed to bang something out while I was in the Chicago airport between flights on the way home. We're going to actually talk about that very briefly today.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
Well, there's been a few things in the news in the last month, certainly. Well, I guess we could start off. I'm just going to share a screen here for a second. Let's see here. And the first one was pretty welcome news. I know there was a whole lot of woohoos in Redmond, certainly with the folks I deal with. Do we have a screen up there? Do you see Gartner positions Microsoft as a leader in BI and analytics platform?
Yeah, it looks nice.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. I mean, I think we're all probably pretty familiar with the Gartner Magic Quadrant. Microsoft's always, typically up there, but I think this is the first time it's ever been quite as far ahead of the pack as it is, certainly on the completeness of vision track. And it was interesting when we gave our seminar on Sunday, how many people were looking at Microsoft versus specifically Tableau, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you can see from the chart, it's my kind of take on that right now from a BI standpoint. Power BI specifically is poised to take on Tableau head to head. That's what it's meant to do. And this kind of lines up with what I see is happening. And that Tableau is still probably ahead of the game a little bit from a features standpoint, but Microsoft is competing very, very well on price. And they're moving very, very quickly. So there's that, the completeness of vision. They're way ahead. Their vision is certainly there. They're just maybe not quite as done as the Tableaus or the Clicks of the world. But that makes perfect sense to me. So yeah, a lot of wahoos out of Redmond when this one came out. I know Jen Underwood hosted this with a whole lot of fanfare. That's for sure. We got another one. You might want to talk about this. There was the conference we were on for IT Unity last week. There was a little bit of noise generated out of that.
Yeah, there's some articles out there talking about when Microsoft might be releasing the next version of SharePoint. From a BI perspective, there's a lot of fun stuff out there. But at this point, it's been out there for 2 weeks, and nobody's refuted it. So they've not confirmed it either, but it's an interesting story. We know that Microsoft is coming fast and furious, and they're working really hard on SharePoint 2016, and that almost feature complete with the release candidate version that's out there. So, it's an interesting possibility to see this before my birthday, which would be a very nice birthday present. But it's it specifically came, the reason why I think, John, you wanted to put it in here is because it came out during the Excel Services NBI section.
That's fun.
That Excel Services is no longer a part of SharePoint. It's now a part of Office Online Server. I think that's part of the conversation we're going to have a little bit about the stack today, is where do things live in the new world, and how exactly does that play? So, I'm very excited about it. The statement that was made was specifically about the fact that the stuff that is going to come alongside of SharePoint 2016 when it releases. The Office Online Server, I believe it said, is going to release at the same time. So whether you believe the dates or not, it's more the confirmation that RTM, they'll RTM together, seeing as they're complementary. And we'll talk more about that as we get into the stack conversation.
Yeah, and I think it's a pretty big topic too. The separation now of Excel, et cetera. I think probably our next webcast we'll dive a little deeper into it as well. All right, and what else? That's most. I've got a number of other Power BI items, but we've got a specific section here for what's new in Power BI. I did make a note of some of the comments coming out of our session on Sunday, but I don't know if you want to address that. You had some issues about making sure you start your SharePoint farm from a pristine state.
Yes. There were some guffaws in the room as some of the things that I say I don't necessarily think about all the way through before they come out of my mouth. I was referring to the fact that you want a clean baseline.
Yep.
And specifically we were talking at that point about SQL, and SQL is the back end, and it uttered, and it became the running joke of the week that I right out of my mouth, I started talking about your dirty back end. So,
that's it.
Yeah. Thanks for that one there, John.
You're welcome.
Nothing like recurring embarrassment to start off a good show. Yes.
I have to take every opportunity I can.
Okay, I'm just going to start picking your nose here. All right, moving on.
You can pick your friends, you can pick your nose, but you can't pick your friend's nose.
Unless they're a giant head, and then you can. All right.
That's right.
We write these timelines, and then we never stick to them. So moving on, let's get into our tips and tricks section. Do you want to do your tips and tricks first, or do you want me to go first?
Sure. Yours might take a few more minutes. Yours is, I think, going to be as much of a demo as anything, which was, it blew me away. But I'll get to that. I'll get to that. There's, it's some of these things, it's hard to figure out what fits in news and what fits in tips and tricks. This is kind of an item for both. I saw this get posted on the interwebs last week, and it's I'm still sharing my screen here, so that's fine. It's a tool that came out. It's a web-based tool, and it's a data generator. So if you've ever wanted to pull together data for a demonstration, I typically look for real-world data, but sometimes you want to find something that's particularly going to suit the capabilities that you're trying to feature. This is a tool that will do that for you, and I think it's rather interesting. It'll let you generate up to 10,000 rows of data in a number of importable formats: CSV files, Excel files, SQL files, et cetera, et cetera. You can see it right here on the web page. Mm-hmm. And you can specify basically a table of a series of columns of any different given types. And it's totally a web-based interface. There's nothing to download. You basically come in here. You give the column a name. Basically name 1. And then you're going to pick, what data type is that? And you can see person data. It's all preset for you. Credit card data, country data, a whole lot of stuff that would be pre-configured, as well as just regular type data. I'll just pick here, I don't know, first name. We got name 1, and I can just add a row, and I can just keep adding rows to fill up the table I want to demonstrate. Hit the download button, and away we go. I can get my data now back in any of these various formats. From there, of course, you can pull it into whatever data source you want to read from and do your demonstration. I haven't used it in a real-world scenario or a demonstration scenario yet, but I'm going to. It's really definitely powerful. What's that?
I said this is really great stuff. One of the things I encourage people to do when trying to demo BI is never use real data of yours. Because until you don't want to go showing a VP sales data, because what if you slice it wrong? And they're really looking at the detail at that point. They're no longer looking at it from a functionality. Hey, here's what we can do if you're trying to go off and get somebody to buy into a data platform. You want to use some fake data. This gives you the ability to go off and do that. And whether it's fake data or just fake in your world, like go off and take real world data. John, you use the shark attack data quite a bit, and other NOAA data, things like that. I use some of the Esri data sets, and being able to generate information that way. We go off and creating demos, but when you're trying to do it in a business setting and you want to be able to show someone potential sales data, you have to be able to use some random generation information, because if they start to look at it and think it's real, that's all they're going to see. They're only going to go directly to the detail. You're never going to get the real requirements out of them of how they need to slice it and dice it and be able to actually work with the tooling. So this is huge.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, you don't want them necessarily. There might be cases where you do, but you don't want them to focus on the data itself. You want them to focus on the tool. Mm-hmm. It's lorem ipsum, right? It's lorem ipsum for data. So, if you're putting page content together for layouts, you always use lorem ipsum so we can focus on how the page looks as opposed to what it says.
Yeah. They need to have a bacon ipsum version of this. That way, that can be a lot of fun.
Bacon ipsum. Now you're talking, man. Now you're talking. Sure. So the next thing I had from a tips and tricks standpoint, this is pretty important. This is the blog post I bashed out while I was sitting in the Chicago airport, because this comes up over and over again. And with the release, we'll talk about this in a minute, but with the release of the Enterprise Gateway for Power BI, it's more important. I'm not going to sit here and read the post to you, but you can visit my site anytime you want to. But the bottom line here is this: the Enterprise Gateway for Power BI allows the Power BI service to connect back to data on premises, either in a refresh scenario or in a direct connect scenario. The way it does this is by the service reaching back, talking to the gateway, and then the gateway passing credentials to the back end, the clean back end. I had to.
Yep, that's okay. Keep going.
What it does is it stores a set of credentials to connect to that back end. So it's always going to connect using stored credentials. But there's a fundamental difference in the way it connects back to analysis services data sources than it does any other data source, including SQL Server. With those sources, anyone who uses that connection is going to connect with that proxied identity. So we call that basically a proxy identity. A group of people using that same identity. When you do that, you want to make sure that identity doesn't have any more access than it needs to data, because again, you're opening it up to anyone who has access to the gateway at that point. Okay, that makes perfect sense. Now with SSAS leverages the effective username parameter. And you've probably, if you've heard us talk, you've probably heard that come up. It's becoming more and more important because that's the way that that Power BI is connecting back to multidimensional data on premises. In order to do that, it still connects with that proxy credential, but the difference here is once it makes that connection, it uses the credential of the consuming user, right? The user who's actually clicking on that report in Power BI. It passes that through via that proxy credential. But in order to do that, that credential has to have manager access to SSAS, which is a super high level of access. So you gotta be very, very clear when you're setting up your gateway data sources, which type you're connecting to, whether it's SSAS or not, because they have exact opposite requirements from a security standpoint. And I don't think that Microsoft, frankly, has in their documentation out there made that clear or even mentioned it at all. So it's very important. If you want this stuff to work and work well, you're going to have to keep that in mind. That's all that post is all about.
So Teresa has a question, but before she has it, I just love the fact that on the screen people are probably seeing both your faces, because that's the same picture that thing comes from. It's pretty
that's true.
So Teresa asked a question: does the Enterprise Gateway apply to SharePoint 2013, SharePoint 2016, or both? You want to answer this one, John, or you want me to?
Well, it doesn't really apply to SharePoint at all, right? It applies to Power BI. So the Enterprise Gateway gets installed on premises, and the Power BI service is what connects back in through it. And SharePoint itself doesn't have anything to do with it, except that it can actually act now, good segue, as a data source. So you can connect to on-prem SharePoint list data through the Enterprise Gateway with Power BI. I don't know if that answers your question. I hope so.
And John, is that going to be, will you be able to talk to 2013, 2016 data?
You'll be able to talk to 2013 or 2010 or 2016. I'm pretty sure about the 2010. It's using that list data services endpoint, and that was available in 2010. There could be some limitations with 2010, but to the best of my knowledge, it works just fine.
So Teresa asked an additional question: does SQL version matter?
What you're connecting to the back end, I don't know for sure what versions are supported. I suspect that it doesn't matter, but I can't say so for sure.
So let's be very clear, though. This is a Power BI Enterprise Gateway. It's not coming off SQL Server Media.
That's right.
So it's not going to be SQL Server 2016. You have to wait for that. You need to go out to the powerbi.com website in order to download the Enterprise Gateway. It has nothing to do with SQL as far as this piece is concerned.
Right.
It's connecting up to backend data sources. And you can connect up to any of the data sources that it allows, and SQL is one of them. So the limitation on SQL version, I'm imagining it's going to be able to talk to any version of SQL that's supported at this point.
Yeah, I can think of one limitation with SSAS. Because it uses effective username, it's going to need a SQL SSAS that supports it. And I think they first started supporting that with 2012. It could have been 2008 or 2, but I think it was 2012 when that was first supported in SQL Server analysis services.
SQL 2012 SP1 is what I believe you have to have, John. That's the kicker.
So that's for SSAS. For SQL Server, I think they're just using standard SQL drivers to connect back in, and it's not just SQL, right? It'll connect to SAP HANA right now, connects to Oracle. I already mentioned SharePoint lists. Can connect to the file system and folders as data sources. So if you ever use Power Query connect to a folder, you can actually use the Enterprise Gateway to keep your data fresh up in the cloud. And I'll mention it again. Kind of doing Enterprise Gateway to death, aren't we? As I mentioned before, Enterprise Gateway supports both live connections, and that's where the query is executed on the source server, or refreshable connections. And that's where the data gets returned back up to the Power BI service and cached there. Both of those scenarios are supported by it.
All right. So if you'll give me access to share.
Yeah. So I'm going to stop sharing. You go ahead.
All righty. I am going to share my screen. And as John and I have been talking about, we just spent a bunch of time together. Let's see. I want to share this.
Well, this blew me away. During our presentation, Jason decided to put this together with Power BI and got it right from the get-go to the end. And I didn't even know it was coming. So I found this quite useful. I thought that you guys could certainly benefit from it as well.
So hopefully you guys are seeing my screen at this point. What we did, John and I have been working on this for quite a while. John's delivered the pre-con alone before, and we do a lot of video recordings of some of this stuff just so that it makes it really repeatable, because the bandwidth limitations at some of the conferences are higher than others, and we want to make sure that we can do rock solid demos every time. So we've got it all recorded, and we had 26 demos we were planning on doing. We got through 12 of them. And we realized we needed a way to share these videos with the attendees at that conference, because everybody was really into it. It was really great. So I said, you know what, I'll create an Excel survey on OneDrive, just my commercial OneDrive. So I just went in really quickly and said, in here, let me pop this a little bit bigger, said, let me do something new. And I went into new and I said Excel survey. And in here, I just went ahead and created, as soon as it comes up, an Excel online survey, pops up a nice little UI on top of it for me. And you just start typing your questions. It gives you the ability to put whatever you want. And at first we said, we're just going to ask for email address and name so that we can get the information to people. And then John said, well, we can always point Power BI at it. I said, well, then we need to ask a couple of additional questions. So what we did, and I'm just going to minimize this because there's some personal data in this particular survey. I don't want to share that if I don't have to. In here, I created a quick survey. In order to get the videos, you give us the information and, a couple of things like rate us highly, please, and, and the whole 9 yards. So we created this. And then John said, okay, well, now we need to be able to see it. So we used Power BI and created a survey result. And I wanted to be able to show this. I had a whole mobile demo I was going to do, but I decided, why not? Let's go ahead and pull together the information. So I was able to do this right from my phone and plugged it into the projector. And based upon those questions, I was able to get the answers back and do some really cool drill in and be able to get into some of the information. I even was able to, if you go out and look at my Twitter feed, using the mobile device, I was actually able to go off and share the specific pieces of the dashboard and actually stamp some different fun stuff on top of it and everything else like that. So it was very useful. It was good for us to be able to see our feedback and get some opinions on, did you like the recorded demos? And most people did. Was the day really useful? And what did you think of the two of us? So it was really awesome to be able to get to see our comments and feedback as well. But it was something I put together. I built the survey in about 3 minutes, and then we built the dashboard in the first version of it, because being perfectionists, throughout the entire day, we tweaked it and changed colors and made it easier and all that fun stuff. But putting the first one together and building this out really took 3 minutes. So about total of 6 minutes, people gave us the feedback, and we were able to actually see real-time data coming in on the dashboard, refreshed hourly, because I'm using Power BI Pro, and be able to see all of this stuff on my phone. And as soon as I clicked it, it was able to pop up on the phone as well. So it was really useful and helpful information to be able to play with.
Yeah, the real-time nature, I think, or near real-time nature is quite interesting, because, of course, for those who haven't played with it before, that Excel survey tool, it's got not only a designer, but when you fill that out, you just fill out the questions, but it's actually updating a spreadsheet in behind the scenes, and that's what Jason connected the Power BI to. So whenever somebody submitted something from the room, it would show up here on our dashboard. So it was pretty, I thought it was really slick.
It was right in Excel, so we were able to actually see it, and we're trying not to modify it or anything to give ourselves better scores. But it was really nice to be able to see all the information and all that. So it was very handy.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That's something anybody can use in a presentation to get immediate feedback too. I'm going to start incorporating that as much as I possibly can. That's for sure.
All right. Well, we are halfway through our hour together.
Yeah.
And I think we have some really good stuff still to talk about. So let's go ahead and transition into what's new in Power BI, John.
Let's do that. I'm going to grab the screen again and bring up my blog post again. Okay, so you've made a little bit of mention to it. A couple of weeks ago, the team announced anonymous embedding for Power BI workbooks. I am sharing now. No, I'm not. There. Now I'm sharing, aren't I?
Yep.
Okay, good. Yeah, so the Power BI team, and as they are wont to do every week, announced a new feature called anonymous embedding. And what that lets you do is take pieces of your Power BI reports, actually entire Power BI reports as it stands today, and make them available first day with the new mouth, isn't it? Anonymously on the web. So that got me going because I've demoed for years, notably in PowerView way back when, shark attack data. Being an avid diver, shark attack data is somewhat how many sharks are attacking divers? And I was driven by that, plus an article that I saw floating around Facebook just recently that said in 2015 there were absolutely no shark attacks on divers. So I said, I'm going to go find that out for myself. And I've always wanted to be able to create a portal of this information that anybody can use. And I thought this might let me do it. And so as you can see from the screen, I've got a Power BI dashboard I've put together from the global shark attack file. So if you were to do a Google search or a Bing search on the global shark attack file, you'll see there's a group of researchers that have an Excel workbook out there that anybody can download anytime they want, and it's up to date daily with any shark attacks that there may be. And I had some challenges around getting that downloaded automatically. I've been able to overcome them using, frankly, Windows tasks, scheduled tasks. But with that, I can use Power BI to connect to that Excel file as a data source, create this Power BI desktop, and at the end of the day, I wanted to share it out. So without going into all of the details of how it's built, you can see I've got a dashboard here with a series of figures across the top, attacks, fatalities, and I separated out attacks on scuba divers and fatalities on scuba divers. So if you're a diver and you're worried about sharks, you can see through all recorded time, there have been 23 fatalities with regard to shark attacks versus 1,100 fatalities overall, and 72 that come with surfing. So as a sport, diving's a whole lot safer than surfing. I think it's fair to conclude. And as to that article that I was responding to, I just can slice down here on 2015, and once we upload, you can see. In fact, there were no fatalities in 2015 on divers, but there was one attack, and you can see here. I could drill down further, but you can see it actually happened in Brazil. This person was scuba diving on the 21st of December. So presumably the writer of that article had a Christmas deadline and got it done a little early, published away, and away we go. So there's only slightly inaccurate. There was one record, but it's quite interesting what you can do. And if you notice, when I clicked that filter on the right-hand side or the slicer on the right-hand side, everything on this page updated. If you've worked with Power BI, you're going to know that's how it works. You can see how these are the attacks in 2015 worldwide right here. Here's how it breaks down by sex, not of the shark, mind you, of the person who got attacked. And how the identified species was recorded. So you can see the great whites were fairly active last year, and bulls come second. And if anybody's ever seen that picture of me with the MVP shirt doing this in front of the shark, that's a bull shark in behind me. So, and there's some other fun stuff in here. You can simply click on a report to get a detail, and that goes back to the global shark attack file, and you can see some detailed reports on what happened in that particular attack. So if you want to know a little more detail on it. The other fun piece you can find here is that if you scroll back somewhere around, let's see, I think it was in April. in the U.S. You can see there's a gentleman that we know very well right here. I'm highlighting.
Yeah, well, the problem is that he wrapped himself in bacon before he went diving.
So Mark Rackley got attacked by a blue shark. Now, obviously, that's not the same Mark Rackley. Mark Rackley is a National Geographic photographer. But anyway, so I probably dwelled a little too long on the actual topic. The interesting part is here, or from here, once you've created one of these reports, all I have to do to use this feature is to come down here to publish to web. I'm going to pick that, and I get an embed code that I can that I can send out via email. And then I can anonymously access that post, or I get an embed code, which is basically an iframe. And once you do that, you can create, if you want to come down again to my blog, I know I'm flogging my blog a lot. I wrote a post about it, but you can see I now have a page that sits there on my site that I can click on, Shark Attacks Worldwide, and it opens. You can see this little Power BI element that's embedded within the page. And it's fully interactive. You can go to my site now and if you want to, and interact with it and find out whatever you wanted to know about these shark attacks. Kind of fun. And I had something else to add there, and it's just totally slipped my mind.
No worries.
Oh, no, sorry. It's updated nightly. So if there are any new shark attacks, you're going to see it the next day. And since I published it, and here we are sitting, on February 5th is the last shark attack I've got on this report. I've been sitting here hoping somebody gets attacked by a shark so I can demonstrate it working. That's
you're a sick man, sir. A very sick man.
Sad state of affairs, yeah, absolutely.
We have a question, and
yeah.
I'm going to apologize in advance. I may not get the pronunciation of your name correct. Ofer asked the question, can you embed a report with a parameter using the query string to filter the embedded report?
That's an excellent question. This feature, no. But embedding is, it's an excellent question because of especially how it pertains to SharePoint, right? So, and the way reporting services works, right? We know how to embed a report in SharePoint with reporting services. We can use parameters and drive those parameters with web parts. Wouldn't it be nice to do that with Power BI? That's pretty much the #1 feature they're working on right now in the Power BI team. I don't know how that will shake out with anonymous reports. I imagine it will. I imagine you'll be able to. But a big target is to be able to do that in SharePoint, right? So I can create I can use a Power BI report in addition to an SSRS report and embed that on a SharePoint page, whether it's in the cloud in SharePoint Online or it's on-prem. So that's a fantastic question.
All right. So we are no SSRS in 365 is the additional statement from Ofer there. So
yeah, there's no SSRS in 365. So that's a whole other topic that we're going to get to probably next time. SSRS has got I guess we showed that during the IT Unity online conference last week. SSRS is getting some major facelifts on-prem, but where you would position SSRS is kind of in the cloud where you'd position Power BI. Now, it's not a perfect equivalence. Power BI does analytical reports. SSRS does paginated operational reports, but they kind of line up the same way. But you'll soon be able to cross-pollinate the two. You should be able to take Power BI files and render them in SSRS. That's been stated by Microsoft. But the other way around, you can also take SSRS reports or SSRS items and publish them into Power BI dashboards and conceivably SharePoint Online. So while you don't have an SSRS server in the cloud, you could use SSRS content in the cloud. Hopefully that helps.
All right. So
yeah. And I've got one other thing too in terms of what's new for Power BI. These guys come up with an awful lot of stuff. I'm going to pop over here to Shark Attacks. I'm just going to go back to my demos dashboard, and I'm going to bring that screen over. So you can see here I've got an Excel workbook, and it's just sitting here on my laptop, on my workstation, and I've got my desktop open to Power BI, which is of course cloud-based. So what I was just talking about with SSRS before, I'm going to show you something like it with Excel. The team put out a product called the Power BI Publisher for Excel. and you can look, do a search on that. You can download it, and when you install it, you get this new tab in Excel, Power BI. And what does it let you do? Well, it lets you take any of these Excel objects and publish them out to your dashboard in Power BI. So I've got one of my tie graph workbooks open, and I'm looking at this visualization that's showing our top five contributors to our Yammer network. And this is for our company, so I'm allowed to show this stuff. And what if I want to show that on my dashboard? So you can see this empty dashboard over here. Well, all I have to do is pin it, just like I can any other visualization in Power BI. When I hit that, I get the option to, I'm going to add a tile. I didn't delete it from before. I'm going to go ahead and add a tile. I'm going to use a different image because it hasn't been pinned already. So I'm going to take that threads view. I'm going to pin that into to an existing dashboard, and that existing dashboard is called demos. And then I'm going to hit pin. And without doing anything, you can see it now shows up here in my Power BI dashboard. And I can mix and match that with any of my other Power BI dashboard items. So that's about all you can do. And all you're really doing is taking an image of that and pushing it up. It's refreshable, so you can come into here in Excel and hit the refresh button. But that's basically what's going on. The SSRS piece works a lot the same way.
It's really useful. It actually tells you right there, image imported from Excel. It gives you the information of the source, so you know if you were in here trying to be able to play with it. It doesn't give you all that much you can do, but it tells you where it actually came from. Because you can go back and try and do a refresh of that information. It's got to be pushed, right? So it tells you where it came from.
Yep, and just like with any other Power BI dashboard tile, you can resize it, you can edit it. You can see I just changed the title a little bit. You can do whatever you want with it. But that it's very, very straightforward, very, very simple, but yet another example of that piece of integration. With the SSRS integration, it works the same way. You can take a visualization, but SSRS will automatically keep it refreshed in the background for you. So that's coming with SSRS 2016. I should point that out too.
Gotcha. All right. Well, this particular episode was supposed to be about the stack, and I think we've covered some really cool stuff. But I want to make sure that we get to the last 20 minutes in the last 20 minutes talking about the Microsoft BI stack for folks who may have come here with the expectation of hearing a little bit of our historical side of the world as well. So if you want to go ahead and start off that, I think that'd be great.
We got her. Thanks for keeping me on time.
I'm not just a giant floating head, John.
Apparently, I might be. I don't know. It's a little disconcerting seeing your head back, or my head back there. And anyway, yeah, as Jason mentioned, we wanted to walk through a little bit of the Microsoft stack in general. And it's a confusing topic, right? Especially when you're coming to this stuff new. And jump in, by the way, if you got anything to add here.
I have no fear.
But there's a number of products in the stack. Just give it a minute. Give it a few more minutes. And this list isn't even complete. There's a lot of stuff I don't have on here. And the challenge is to understand what fits where, right? What to use when, and architecturally how they all fit together. What do I need to achieve this particular goal? And these are all elements of the overall BI stack. I guess data Zen, I might be able to take that logo off soon and make it SSRS, but for now it still stands alone, so we'll leave it alone. And to understand that, it's important to go back to the basics. And I'm talking about business intelligence basics, the way BI has been for quite some time. And if we look at it, it's really the way enterprise BI still runs. And the fundamental concepts here is that we have data. We want to abstract our data away from the source so that we can transform it into basically a shape that we want, so that we can work with it intelligently. We don't want to work with fancy or oddly named columns, etc., that are different data types. So we want to be able to extract our data from the sources, transform it into the state we want, and we'll do a little diagram or do a little animation to go along with that. We want to transform it into the state we want, and then we load it into the data warehouse. I'll click away because I think it freaks Jason out that those gears never stop.
I love it. It's awesome.
Anyone who's ever been to one of my talks has seen this slide because it's a fundamental concept. And we load data into the data warehouse, and from there we distribute it out into data marts or into some sort of a multi-dimensional model. It depends on what we want to do with our data. So I've got some terms up here that are probably bear a little bit of explanation. Now, I mentioned extract, transform, and load. That's that ETL process. That's what it's called. Have to ignore a call. We've got data warehouse, and we've got data marts. And I know when I was first new to this stuff, I always found it confusing. What's the difference? They're both databases. They're really just both databases and likely a SQL database, or using the SQL data engine. The real question is, how are they designed? And if you look at the retail world, that's probably the best analog for this. The real difference between a data warehouse and a data mart is the same thing as between wholesale and retail, right? You jam the data in after you first load it. You basically have it all available, and then you kind of parse it out depending on what your consuming clients are going to look like. So if you've got a reporting client, you might want to flatten the data. But if you wanted to use your data mart to load into, maybe you might want to load it into SSAS. You might want to have it highly relational, but mashed up with other data. The data cubes and tabular models, these are just really kind of specific instances of a data mart, right? But they store data differently. So if you're going to be slicing and dicing your data, you want to look at a particular measure like sales figures by different dimensions, things like geography or person name or organizational structure. It's going to store the data in a way that's going to support that. And then what do we do with our data? Well, we use various servers or clients to access it. So typically, the data marts will be consumed by either these reporting servers, middleware servers, or directly by usually analysts connecting to these data marts, or they can also connect again to these multi-dimensional sources. So all of these consuming servers are going to access data usually from the marts or the cubes, not directly from the warehouse. All of this depends on how you've designed it. This is the concept. So given this, how does the Microsoft stack line up with that? Well, it's almost all SQL product, SQL team product. It is also, well, not almost, not completely all. The big chunk of this left-hand area is taken up by a product that most people don't even know they own. SSIS, SQL Server Integration Services. To my mind, it's the unsung hero of the BI world, right? It's the tool that does all of that heavy lifting for us. We're all familiar with the SQL Server that lets us spin up these data marts and data warehouses. I really don't need to say much more about that. And SSAS, SQL Server Analysis Services, is what gives us the ability to do these multi-dimensional analyses, slicing and dicing by different dimensions. And there's two flavors of SSAS. There's the conventional, older read, but that doesn't mean it's not functional. OLAP mode analysis services, and that's what we mean. That's what we're talking about when we talk about cubes. And then there's also the new tabular mode of SSAS, and you may know of that technology as Power Pivot, because the back end of Power Pivot is one of these data models. We should accurately refer to these things as data models, but people often refer to them as cubes because they basically do the same thing as these OLAP cubes, and they have the same front-end interface. You don't necessarily know what sort of a back-end system you're working with when you're working with SSAS. Now let's come down here to the server side in terms of the consuming servers. The big one here at the top is SSRS, SQL Server Reporting Services, and that can run in native mode. It stands alone, and it has its own login capability and user management capability, and it serves up reports to users. But SSRS can also be installed on SharePoint servers and run in SharePoint integrated mode, which means the reports, the report definitions are stored in SharePoint libraries, and the user management is done through SharePoint. But there's a reporting services engine that is doing the actual rendering in behind the scenes, even though it installs that, in this case, as a service application on SharePoint. That's also from the SQL Server team, as is Power Pivot for SharePoint. But before we can talk about Power Pivot for SharePoint, we have to talk about Excel services. And Excel services can be connected to back-end data from SharePoint. Power Pivot sits on top of Excel services to give us the ability to slice and dice on those Power Pivot models in the Excel workbooks. And at the end of the day, dirty little secret is that Power Pivot for SharePoint is really just a specialized version of analysis services with a service application on the front end for keeping their workbooks up to date. You can also use Performance Point in SharePoint to connect back to these back-end systems. These four guys kind of constitute the four pillars of BI in SharePoint itself. And then, of course, Excel.
Before you move on, John, people may have the question, with Excel services no longer being a part of SharePoint, why is that? Okay, how that gets kind of scary at that point. Well, I mean, with Excel services, we always had to go disable the WAPI bindings in order to actually make Power Pivot work. Because
the what bindings?
The WAPI. Sorry, that's what it is. You make a change to the SP WAPI bindings in order to actually make Excel services not render a Power Pivot workbook. You have to tell it anything with that's coming across that's trying to access the engine, actually let it display. Because if you actually let it try and open with Excel services, it fails. So that's something that's very important, and we found that out in 2010. That we had to go off and start doing this. 2013 is the same way, and now with 2016, so things start to move around and change. But it's definitely an important distinction to make, that having the Excel calculation services no longer being in SharePoint is not a bad thing.
It's absolutely a good thing in my opinion, although it does bring some questions to the fore. But again, I think we'll answer those next time. Gotta have a reason to have people keep coming back, right?
Yeah.
But that's that actually transitions nicely to talk about how does this work with Excel and this concept of personal BI. What I just described was, for the most part, enterprise BI and a little bit of team BI there at the end when you're working with Power Pivot for SharePoint. But personal BI in Excel, how does this line up? It's a lot of the same concepts are in place, right? To start with, I mean, I'm not going to go back to the early days. It's going to take too long to walk through all that stuff. But one of the problems we had with using Excel for BI purposes, although everyone understands it and knows it and it's very, very popular, is that importing data into Excel isn't a good thing. The data becomes orphaned from its source. It's not refreshable, and you lose governance, you lose control over it, and you can't be sure that it's accurate. That's why the concept of Power Pivot originally came into play. And Power Pivot is this little tabular data model that gets stored in the Excel file. And it's a mini version of analysis services that the worksheet can connect to. And in its original incarnation, it could load data directly into itself. So you'd open up Power Pivot, and then you'd pull data into this data model. And you could store hundreds of millions of rows of data. We did the demo on Sunday with the Ashley Madison leak that had 37 million rows of data in it. And you didn't see any degradation in performance. It's just like that. It's just the way the data is stored. And part of that is that it's read-only. So you can only pull the data back from the back-end source. You can't change it, which is a good thing, right? We know that data is going to be valid, at least as of the last time it was refreshed. Now, this import approach, and this is what's supported, by the way, by SharePoint 2013, is a little bit limited. It can't transform the data along the way. You can only do the E and the L part of the ETL process. And that's where Power Query originally came in, or still comes in. And that gives us some transformational capabilities and the ability to load not only to the data model, but to the worksheet. Don't ever do it. You can. Just saying. It's generally a bad idea. And once you've got the data in either your worksheet or your data model, you can consume it through a series of visualizations. The old style Excel pivot charts and pivot tables that we all know and love, right? That can connect either data in worksheets, but it can connect to data in our data model. So that's a wonderful thing. We can use Power View for analytical reports to visually slice our data for us. We can use Power Map if our data is highly geographic or time-based, and basically plot data in 3D on a globe. It's pretty slick. And what we call Power Pivot, I like to view now as simply the model designer, because this tabular data model is baked into Excel 2013 and 2016. So what we mean by Power Pivot really is just the model designer side of Excel.
Okay. It gives you the ability to do the transform inside of the model design, which is what we had always been doing when we were just loading, with the Power Pivot import model, is we actually had to go off and do a lot more work. With Power Query, it made life a lot easier. As you're bringing the data in, you could look at it, you could change it, you could modify it, and it actually showed you how you were doing it in order. Makes things so much easier. You can go back and change that later on as well. So it's a much preferred model of doing things over the Power Pivot model design way.
Yep. Okay, so then when we take that Excel workbook and we put that in SharePoint with all of these other BI technologies, you can see the role SharePoint plays in the picture. And when we have a SharePoint, or in this, of course, we're talking about on-premises here. When we have a SharePoint scenario, SharePoint basically brokers the connection back to our data marts and our multidimensional data sources, and it can use any of these tools to do it. And any of these tools can be placed on a SharePoint page to create a dashboard. So here we can see some standard pivot charts being added to a worksheet. We can add SSRS reports as part of the dashboard on a SharePoint page. We can include elements from Performance Point if we're using that on a dashboard page. And finally, we can include elements from SharePoint itself on that very same dashboard page. This example shows a contact sheet from someone, but I like to use the example of filters. SharePoint filters allow us to drive all of the elements on this page. So I can come to that page and have SSRS reports, Performance Point reports, or an Excel workbooks, all driven by the same filter. That's on-prem. What's this Power BI thing all about, architecturally, or from a product standpoint? Power BI Desktop. And that's the tool, your design tool you use with Power BI. You can also use Excel as a design tool, though. There's several strengths and weaknesses, and you can use Excel files in Power BI. But if you want to live totally within Power BI, you can use the Power BI Desktop. And that keeps a number of the elements from what we just saw about Excel. And it's using exactly the same technologies. You simply don't have the worksheet options, or you don't have the worksheet elements available to you. So you don't get the worksheets. You don't get pivot charts and pivot tables, at least not yet. And you don't get Power Map. Power Map is not a web-happy visualization. But you do get these new reports, these D3-based analytic reports, and their direct analog is Power View reports. Okay, and you can literally import from an Excel workbook into Power BI Desktop, and it will turn your Power Views into these new Power BI reports. You get what's called the Model Designer, which is the same thing as using Power Pivot in Excel. The data model is the center of the universe, and then you have queries, which are Power Queries, and you can literally copy and paste the code for the Power Queries from Excel into Power BI Desktop. So this is one way to understand what the desktop is about. That's the new slide. And then the Power BI service, what's it all about? Well, and this, I'm talking about current state now. So if you're familiar with Power BI before, Power BI for Office 365, this is not that. This is the new service that was announced last July. And I'm just keeping my eye on the clock. I think we're okay.
Yep.
The center of the universe here, and you can see all roads lead to the Power BI dashboard UI. What it doesn't have on here is the mobile client, which fits in the same space. But if you imagine, if you will, the Power BI dashboard UI is sitting here. If we're dealing with Excel files, we can load Excel files directly into the dashboard. We can use the Power BI interface to work as if we were using the old Excel services or Office Online. We can connect that any Excel workbook that's stored in either a OneDrive or SharePoint Online, anywhere in SharePoint Online, and work with it as if you were in SharePoint on-prem, slicing and dicing away. You can also use Excel files as a data source and load them into Power BI, into Power BI natively. And these Excel files that you connect to can also get updated automatically from the Power BI updating, the update service here, because adding an Excel file to Power BI just takes that data model, puts it in its SSAS service, which is updatable through the update service. It's also updatable through an API, so if you're a developer, you can pump data directly into the service. So that workbook that you're updating, or any other Power BI construct here, can be updated through the service, either directly from any cloud-based data source, or from an on-prem data source through the Power BI personal gateway or through the enterprise gateway. This still says on-prem live connectors. I need to update this to say enterprise gateway. And the enterprise gateway connects, again, both back into SSAS. We talked a lot about that earlier because it was just released. And you can also have live cloud-based data sources updating this, actually not updating the dashboard, but when you perform your queries here, they can be going out live to the cloud-based data source instead of going through this refreshed data model, if that makes sense to people. I'm not sure I was the clearest there, but and that's more or less what Power BI is all about. Now, just to close the loop from a BI technology standpoint from Microsoft, we've got these Azure tools, and these are all relatively new. And we're not going to dive anywhere, or I'm just going to mention them, really, but roughly what they're all about. And I'm not an expert on most of these. Well, any of them I'm not an expert on. I am familiar with most of them. Let's put it that way. We can start out with the Azure Data Warehouse. Azure has SQL databases, and it's also got this concept of a data warehouse. And I found it to understand what the data warehouse is all about. It's just helpful to think of it as an elastic version of SQL in the cloud, so that it makes it easy to scale up and scale down from a common pool of resources versus allocating specific databases to specific tasks. Azure Data Factory, what I described as SSIS earlier, think of that in Azure, and that's what Azure Data Factory is all about. So it's really about ETL, getting data from one place, transforming it, and putting it somewhere else. Now, there's a gateway component to it, so it's good at going and getting data from on-prem and in the cloud as well. Machine learning, it's what we used to call data mining back in the old days with the OLAP cubes and SSAS, and that's the ability to throw a whole lot of data at something and apply models, or basic predictive models to it, and you can develop an empirical, essentially an equation or an API out of it, so that after training your model, you could start to throw variables at it and get expected results from it. That pattern matching stuff, how old do you think I am, and all that, some of that neat stuff we've seen coming out of Microsoft uses machine learning heavily. Streaming analytics is just the ability to analyze data as it's happening. So you get a sliding window of time, and you can chart data. So a stock ticker would be a perfect example of streaming analytics. HD Insights, that's Microsoft's version of Hadoop. And HD Insight's all about going and getting unstructured data. It's really, at the end of the day, it's a very, very fast file system that you can write queries against. And data lakes essentially bundles it all up into a consistent interface and provides you some easy tooling. But that's about it. Most of us aren't going to touch that. We're kind of focused in on getting the immediate jobs done. So we're going to be probably focusing, for the most part, unless it comes up on the Power BI and the on-prem stuff with SQL Server and SharePoint.
All right, and it is officially time for us to wrap. We are probably about to go a minute over here, and we want to make sure that we hit on our closing. A couple of fine points for you folks. If you have questions, if there are things you want to see as a part of our show, please email us bifocal, bifocal at itunity.com. We're working on getting a submission form. If you have something you want to talk about on the show, we'd love to have you come join us. We're working on getting some special guests to come join us as well for future episodes. But most importantly, questions. Let us know what you're interested in. Let us know what you guys are lacking, and we're happy to make sure we dive into it. The show has really become sort of a half us talking about neat, cool stuff that's going on, and then half making sure that we give you the background and information. As time goes on, we'll wrap some of that up, and it will become a lot more focused on community input and asking you guys for that feedback. So please be sure to send that to us so we can start getting that stuff lined up. Our next episode, we don't have the exact date yet, but obviously it will be at the end of March, seeing as we're at the end of February. Hopefully this was useful. Thank you all very much for coming. John, it was great to see you again.
Oh, I know you missed me. Outstanding, sir.
All right, sir. And be sure to visit itunity.com for all of the latest and greatest news in the Microsoft space, and visit our blogs as well, and follow us on Twitter.
It was IT Unity that broke that date. If it's true or not, I don't know. But it was IT Unity that broke it last week.
I think it was CMS Wire.
But it was at the IT
right.
Unity conference, right?
Yeah, that's true. All right. Thank you all very much, and have a wonderful day.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.